This time of year, you're going to be inundated with before and after photos from trainers or from gyms. And they might say X amount of kilos or percentage of fat loss and X amount of percentage of muscle tissue gained. I would take that with a huge pinch of salt. Hello and welcome to the Smart Strength Training Podcast. This is podcast episode 32. And today I'm talking about tracking progression when it comes to fat loss and muscle gain. I guess a better way of saying this is how accurately can we track and measure progression when it comes to weight loss being fat loss, and when you're trying to gain muscle tissue, can we actually accurately measure it? Because it's the new year, a lot of you will be on a pathway to do one of those two things, and therefore we need to have a way of measuring what we're doing to see if what we're doing, the methods we're sticking to, if they're actually working. And therein lies some challenges. There lies some challenges in knowing what is the best measure, the accuracy of those measurements, and potentially the pitfalls in over focusing on any one of those. So let's go through them. First up, let's talk about the most common measurements. So scale weight will be the most common thing. So tracking overall changes and trends in body weight. Bioelectrical impedance, so you have those scales in the gym or maybe scales at home that will give you a percentage body fat score. You have circumference measurements, so taking a tape measure, doing a hip, waist, thigh, arm measurement. You might be doing photos, progress photos that give you a visual comparison over time. Calipers, your trainer or facility might actually have physical calipers to measure skin fold thickness. Strength metrics, so looking at your load selection in the gym and progression and the reps performed. Subjective assessments, so how you feel, how your clothing is fitting. And then things like DEXA scanners, hydrostatic weighing, and bob pods that are more medical grade equipment for body composition change. So let's go through and discuss the research, the accuracy, and the reliability of these sorts of measurements one by one. And then we can go through and discuss like the pitfalls, and if you're going to choose them, what's the best thing to do to make sure that the test you're doing is the most accurate way of doing it. Scale weight. So obviously very easy to do, very accessible, very cheap, very affordable. And it can reliably measure, or we can reliably measure trends in overall body weight over time, but there's no measure of body fat. There's no measure of how much of that is muscle tissue. It is just a total body weight. Body weight is affected by lots of things: water, stored glycogen, stool in the colon, fat loss, and muscle tissue. But the first three are the most likely to be sort of undulating across a week. And things like hydration levels and for women, hormone fluctuations are going to massively vary that measure. So, depending on your history with using weight as a metric, it can be massively triggering and therefore potentially isn't the smartest measurement to use. If you're going to use it, recognize that we need to standardize what we do. And that's true of every single one of these measurements. So by that, I mean that you want to measure under the same conditions every time. So first thing in the morning, ideally having not had any water or food, the scale should be on a hard surface. And it's probably worthwhile to make sure you check the reliability of your scales. To get on the scales, get off, get back on, get off, and make sure the measurement you get is the same each time, or do a best of three. I would also strongly advise, because the idea of using body weight should be more to measure the trend. So we don't want to worry about a day-to-day data point. It's quite nice, rather than just looking at numbers, to look at shapes of graphs. So if you're doing a semi-frequent weigh-in, maybe between 3 to 5 times per week, either get scales that instantly log it into an app, or put it into an app so you can see graphed progression. Is it going down if you're trying to lose body fat? Is it going up if you're trying to build muscle tissue? But it's much better to look at a graph shape over time than it is to get dialed in too close on the single data point. And that's super important. We don't want to look at individual data point to individual data point. You have to be able to zoom out and look at the bigger picture of the trend across at least 2 weeks, but certainly 4, 8, and ongoing. You want to be looking at weeks and months, not days. But like I said, very easy and affordable to do. Number two is bioelectrical impedance. So you might have like in-body scales is a really good brand that's out there. In the gym or facility you train in, you might even have a set at home, or you might have a slightly cheaper version of home scale. InBody, the company, does have some fairly rigorous testing of that device. So we can see, because of course a bioimpedance scale is going to give you percentage of muscle tissue and percentage of fat tissue and percentage of muscle tissue. It might even give you a total fat mass in kilos and a total fat mass in total muscle mass and total fat mass. It might even give you a visceral fat score. So it gives you, depending on the scales, you've got quite a few metrics. Like I mentioned, InBody has been fairly rigorously tested, so we can look at the reliability. So for things like fat percentage scores, so the loss of fat, the accuracy is plus or minus 6%, which is actually pretty good. So if you're looking at body fat and you're using an in-body scale, plus or minus 6%. The problem we have is when you go to muscle tissue, because now with muscle tissue, it moves to plus or minus 15%. So that's quite a notable swing in accuracy when it comes to muscle tissue. We have to remember that bioelectrical impedance is basically working on body water, and then the machine is putting in a calculation, an algorithm to work out the percentages. If I give you some personal anecdote, when I've used these things with clients, which I have done a decent amount, you do see some noticeable trends. It definitely struggles. They definitely struggle with people that are very lean or very overweight. The numbers you get are particularly variant. You might get the person on the scale off back on and get quite a noticeable difference in the same testing day at the same moment in time. So just bear that in mind. But certainly they are useful scales. When it comes to the sort of home scales that we get that are much cheaper, they aren't rigorously tested. There's so many companies out there, it's very hard to say. But if the all singing, all dancing lands us between 6% or 15%, depending on the fat mass versus muscle mass, it's going to be much less accurate than that. So just bear that in mind. One of the conversations I have with clients is, are they inaccurate in themselves? So if they are off by a certain amount, will they always be off by that amount? Can we trust, therefore, the direction of change from measurement to measurement? And can we trust the magnitude of change? Very hard to say because they're not tested. I certainly wouldn't trust that in a short term with these devices. I would be looking at things like at least 4 weekly or like 2 months apart. In that sense, I probably would have a bit more faith in trusting the change, maybe certainly the direction of change. Magnitude, hard to really say. But I do think they're worthwhile. But like a lot of these things, you want to make sure that you standardize it. So the same protocol, first thing in the morning, don't drink water, don't have food. But I think like anything, if you're having a measurement, trying to have more than one, I think it can be a very useful measure, certainly if you have access to them in the gym. Number three, then, moving along, is circumferences. So taking a tape measure around body parts. Obviously, we can track now regional changes. The first one that actually looks at body composition at the hips, body composition at the thighs. But of course, is a total circumference measurement. So you're going to get fat mass in there and muscle tissue. So you don't know of those changes if it's muscle tissue or fat mass. Human error is probably the biggest issue when it comes to circumferences. It's very easy to move up half a centimeter, down half a centimeter. So once again, standardizing your protocol, trying to make sure that if you're taking measurements, you're taking it from the exact same point. The umbilical, the belly button's easy. Obviously, you have a reference point to do. Thighs and arms slightly harder. Are you going to use the thickest part of the arm and measure from there? Or are you simply going to draw a line sort of halfway down from the armpit to the elbow and then find the halfway point, draw a line, and then take a measurement from there? Whatever you do, you need to make sure you always test it under the same conditions every single time. And I would always do best of three. So you do the measurement, bring the arm down, take measure, comes away, go back and do it twice more. Make sure that at least two of those measures are the same, or if they're very, very varied, I would do the best of three. One thing I will say as well is you have to be mindful, similar to the photos, you have to be mindful of water. and inflammation as a whole. Let's say I did a really hard leg session on Friday and I've got localized swelling, a little bit of inflammation, a bit of muscle damage in my thighs, and I take a measurement to my thighs on the Saturday morning. I'm going to have localized inflammation as part of the repair process in my thigh, and that's going to skew the number. If you're trying to lose body fat, that might skew it up, and therefore you get really freaked out thinking your thigh is getting bigger. If you're trying to build muscle tissue, you might think you're getting bigger than you actually are. So just recognize that those regional numbers, especially on the limb, so thigh and arm, are going to be susceptible to changes in cross-sectional area based on what you've just done in training. It might not always be possible to standardize what you do. So if you're doing your measurements, you can't always guarantee it's going to be after a particular day of training, but certainly something to think about as a whole. Moving on, number 4 is progress photos. So progress photos are excellent. They're really good, obviously, as a visual change or a visual reference point of assessments. Have to recognize that proportions and lighting really play into them. If you step forward, step backwards, dark lighting, up lighting, down lighting does really change the shadowing of someone's body. So once again, we want to standardize what you do. Same item of clothing, same room, under the same lighting if possible. Certainly if you're comparing across the course of a year, you have to think of the fact that the seasons will alter the lighting. If you're comparing from month to month, it's less likely that the lighting is going to affect it. But do think about that overall. Progress photos can be massively triggering. I think all of us, if we've ever had photos taken, will then spend a bit of time body checking ourselves in the photo, and it can make people body check in day-to-day life more as well. So you have to be mindful of any of these things that you choose, that it's not going to be massively triggering to do that. Photos can be very useful, but for the wrong person at the wrong moment in their journey, potentially they could be counterproductive. Ideally, you also want to get someone to take the photo. You might not always want your partner to take that photo of you, or a kid, one of your children take a photo. So you have to be mindful of that. But certainly quite useful if you can do them and you're happy to do them. Next up, number 5 is calipers. So calipers, literally the skin fold pinching measurement that your trainer might, your trainer or training facility might offer. I do like these. They are as accurate as the person doing them. As a trainer, I used to do them all the time and I got very good at them. I haven't done them for years, so I would not trust myself to do them now and land them accurately. Same as circumferences, very easy to go up a centimeter or down a centimeter. Also, if I spend too much time trying to get the skin fold thickness pinch, I can push water out of the tissue I'm trying to pinch as well. Massively invasive. Really not the sort of thing you're going to want to do if you're sort of new to exercise or you're body conscious at all. And I do prefer when it comes to calipers, because you can have it done via skin fold pinching. There actually are also, you can get it done with ultrasound. So same idea, measuring skin fold thickness through ultrasound. I prefer, when it comes to these, the actual skin fold measurement rather than the percentage, because the way that it would work is you get all the skin fold measurements, you put it into a calculator, an algorithm, and it churns out a percentage. I actually prefer the regional numbers, so looking at how much skin fold is on the thigh, how much skin fold in sort of millimeters and centimeters is on the bicep, because then you can look at regional changes rather than it going through a calculator and giving you a percentage. But like I said, very, very invasive, and it's not going to be overly accessible to everyone. Strength metrics. So strength metrics obviously aren't a measure of muscle tissue or fat loss, and has little to no bearing on fat loss overall. But I would strongly suggest, of all the things that I'm going to say today, the strength measurements are the one that I say you absolutely have to do. If you're not doing a log of your load or reps performed, then do that from the get-go. That's super, super important. It's a strong indicator of progression, certainly for increasing strength, potentially then for also building muscle tissue. It's obviously got nothing to do with body fat loss, and it could, if you weren't eating enough calories, have nothing to do with muscle tissue as well. But I certainly think it's a worthwhile number to make sure that you feel like you are progressing. One of the problems with calipers, circumferences, photos, body weight, is you can be doing all the things that you should be doing, and those numbers won't always come out as true to you. Your strength in the gym and your strength metrics is a very, very honest number. If you turn up you apply a high level of effort, and you progress what you do, those numbers will do exactly what they should be doing. I love that about them. It keeps you very honest, and it keeps you focused on a part of the workout that you can control, because body composition can be a little bit irregular, and therefore that can really throw people off. And one of the challenges we have, if I think back critically on myself and my coaching practice over the years, when I've dialed clients' mindsets too much into the weight log or the circumferences, when those numbers don't move in the right direction, clients get really disheartened. But actually, everything they're doing is going really well. Their workouts are going really well. The habits are improving slowly, but it's just hard to see continuous fat loss or continuous muscle gain. The strength log can keep you dialed in because it is that honest outcome. And I love that about it. Next up is subjective assessment, how you feel your clothes are fitting. I appreciate a lot of coaches discredit subjective assessments. I really love them, and I use them a lot with my clients. I think it's one of those things that, of course, you can't put numbers to it, but as one of a few assessments that you're doing and a few measures you're doing, I think it's a really great one. Are your clothes feeling better? Plus, you're also doing photos, plus, you've also got scale weight. I think that could be a really great way to create an overall package of how you think about the assessment overall. And then finally, let's talk about DEXA scanners and hydrostatic weighing. Those two are the gold standard when it comes to accuracy of measuring. But very unlikely you're going to have access to a DEXA scanner. Even more unlikely you're going to have access to hydrostatic weighing, underwater weighing, unless you happen to live near a university or a lab. DEXA scanners are usually quite expensive. It's the sort of thing most people would do maybe a couple of times a year. You're probably not going to do consistently throughout a weight loss phase, unless you happen to have a facility nearby, and money probably is no object. They are, as I mentioned, gold standard. So when we look at research, we'd always look out for a measurement coming in from a DEXA scanner or hydrostatic weighing to guarantee what we are seeing is fat loss and muscle gain. And to state that, sort of bolt on to that, this time of year, you're going to be inundated with before and after photos from trainers or from gyms. And they might say X amount of kilos or percentage of fat loss and X amount of percentage of muscle tissue gained. I would take that with a huge pinch of salt, because as you've just heard, we have little to no accuracy, or unless someone's got access to an in-body bioimpedance device, and we've still got a plus or minus 6% inaccuracy on the fat, plus or minus 15 on the muscle tissue, we can't trust those numbers. So we do need to, when we're making conclusions about different dietary protocols, different resistance training interventions, I want to see research. I want to see research because we need to see some sort of quality data when it comes to percentage body fat lost and when it comes to muscle tissue being increased. Also, what you might look for muscle tissue is like an MRI or actually a muscle biopsy. Other words, it is very, very hard. You see with muscle tissue, we haven't got anywhere near the accuracy that I think people actually realize that we can get. So just a note on that one. And actually, just to finalize, there is some emerging technology. You might have seen 3D scanning, usually on sort of advanced wearables like smartphone apps. I've seen no validation from scientific literature, so really hard to say, but certainly will be interesting to see. Once again, I have seen these a little bit. I think they are good, but I don't know about you. Having a 3D scan of your body can also be quite triggering. But could be an interesting one for the future. Potentially could be some accuracy to that as well. There will again be some localized inflammation, bloating, those sort of things that 3D imagery will always capture, so it won't necessarily be 100% accurate. But all those things are quite interesting overall. So let's talk about sort of best practice and some limitations and things to think about. So let's talk about the things to think about. The psychological impact of tracking is the main thing to think about. As you've heard me talk through that list, if you're thinking, oh God, photo sounds really daunting and weighing in sounds really daunting, then do not choose those. Choose the ones that feel like they will be the most beneficial to you, because one of the major issues we have with some sort of tracking with this is you need it to create some sort of positive reinforcement. There's always that chance of obsession and, of course, frustration. Um, it can lead to obsessive body checking and poor body image overall, or certainly leaning you into a bias already to have more poor body image. So you have to be really mindful when it comes to certainly things like photos, what you're going to do to make sure that you psychologically it works for you overall. And ultimately, you can adjust what you can do. I think it's really important if you do find yourself getting a little bit too obsessive or a little bit too sort of frustrated by any particular measure you have in place, change it. Don't stick to it. As you've heard, we have got a few measures there that we can work through. So let's talk about best practice. So first up, it's important to have more than one. So if you're just doing body weight, you are going to be in a roller coaster of a journey for looking at those metrics overall. So I think it's really, really smart to make sure you have body weight, maybe circumferences as well, and that strength log, because that's the thing that should always be in there. So make sure you combine multiples. Think about the frequency of when you're going to do this. If I was going to do circumferences, I would only do it every 4 weeks. If I was doing photos, again, I'd only do it 4 weeks. If I was doing body weight, I'd be more likely to suggest to do that probably 3 to 5 times per week. Or if you are going to do it as like a weekly measure, I would strongly advise doing it 3 separate days back to back, which I know isn't a weekly measure. Doing it, say, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, just so you might capture any fluctuations in body weight. Otherwise, if you happen to measure on a high 1 week and a low the next week, you might think, oh my God, it's great, I lost loads of weight. And then you measure on a high again the week after, and all of a sudden you think your body fat's stabilized or it's gone up. But it's not. It's just the data that you're capturing. And we have to recognize that up and down nature. So make sure you set out a frequency and you really understand it, or you understand the frequency you're going to use. And finally, do not let any single metric totally dominate whether you believe whether or not this is working. Ultimately, there are so many benefits to exercise outside of muscle tissue and fat loss, certainly fat loss. Muscle tissue should be a really positive one to do. But if you allow one particular measure to totally dominate your worth and your feeling of progression, that's going to be a major problem. So we want to make sure that we spread our focus, which is again why I love to have that strength log in there, because that's the most honest one. And that way we can look at all the measurements together. And if I was going to focus on one, it would be the strength log and nothing else, because like you said, that's the most honest one that you know you have more chance of controlling. So hopefully that's now really clear what each of these do, the limitations to them, and if you're going to use them, what's best practice to make sure that you can improve the reliability of each and every one of those.